This is the launch of the Compendium of U.S. Best Practices for Clean Energy and Climate Change and Energy Efficiency. The idea for this compendium was Griff Thompson's about 2 years ago. So the Griff is going to open the meeting, talk about the compendium, and I just want to introduce Griff. He is the person who's in charge of climate change and energy programs at the U.S. State Department in the Bureau of Oceans, and he is also the senior energy advisor. He has a long and illustrious history, and I think he mentioned earlier today that he's been doing renewable energy for 20 years. And he used to work at USAID. Now he's a key point person at State. One of the many fascinating things about Griff, I think, is that he actually has his PhD in political philosophy from Georgetown, and I think that becomes apparent whenever you listen to him talk. So I'm just going to immediately turn it right over to Griff. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Leslie. And again, thank you, all of you, for spending time out of this gorgeous day outside to come here and listen to these panels. I want to thank the Yale World Fellows, Yale University, certainly REEL, ACORE. I want to many thanks to Maria Ellingson, Leslie Hunter, and Tom Wyrick for working so arduously on these best practices. And there's thumb drives outside. I hope all of you grab them. But again, the Alliance Save Energy and ACORE were the key drivers in this, and they've really done great work. And so I'm very happy to be able to be here at this launch. And Leslie asked me to give you some opening comments. So what I want to do is kind of frame the discussion, building on the great Climate Civics Institute panel we had right before lunch, which I really think set the tone on terms of what we need to do to move forward. And I want to start with the words of the late, great Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who in 1932, in a dissenting opinion, stated, quote, "It is one of the happy incidents of the federal system that a single courageous state may, if its citizens choose, serve as a laboratory and try novel social and economic experiments without risk to the rest of the country," unquote. And so we are here today to launch a project that indeed celebrates that courage and those happy incidents and pays tribute to those states and counties and cities who are not only courageous but creative as well. It is a courage based on the promise of parochialism, premised on the principle of proximity. But this understanding of local knowledge and local wisdom is nothing new, for in fact in ancient Greece, Socrates himself saw that the people in the city were the primary source of wisdom. And as it was in ancient Greece, it certainly is in modern day America and other countries as well. And in matters of energy and environment, as we'll hear throughout this afternoon in the following panels, the virtues of localism are many, and that in most cases, it is those that are closest to and most familiar with the social, political, and economic exigencies that know what is best. Now, this appreciation of both the intrinsic and the instrumental value of the local experience and wisdom is not what we have normally come to expect from the federal government, at least routinely, and certainly not from those of us within the State Department who live and dwell in this Westphalian world of the nation state. But even those of us in the State Department, in this apex foreign policy institution, understands the value of local experimentation and decentralized knowledge. And while one may not fully subscribe to the late Tip O'Neill's maxim that all politics is local, one cannot deny that much of what makes good policy must ultimately pass the test of the local. In fact, the State Department understands very acutely the dominant global trend that is sweeping around the globe region by region, and that is the increasing decentralization and devolution of economic and political power to the municipalities, the provinces, and to the states. We have come to learn at the State Department what all of you have known for some time, and that is what Justice Brandeis extolled, that in country after country, national leaders are looking to states, provinces, counties, cities, and townships for the solutions to the multiple challenges that confront all of us. In recognition of that fact, Secretary Clinton, not too long ago, announced a new special representative for local affairs in the State Department to ensure that our department sufficiently reaches out to the local authorities to learn the lessons they have learned and help us learn as we implement our foreign policy. The Compendium of Best Practices is simply a first step along what I think is going to be a very promising pathway to a future that is cleaner, more prosperous, and more equitable. It is an attempt to bring the best and the brightest in the U.S. to our partners overseas in hopes that they may find value in our efforts. However, as I'm sure you'll all agree, in order for this initiative to be truly successful, it needs to do more. First of all, we need to deepen it and broaden it within here in the United States. But just as importantly, we need to hear from those from the outside. We need to hear from and listen to the full-throated chorus of those courageous states and provinces and cities that have also done creative work overseas. And so we can share their experiences and learn from them as well. I'm very enthusiastic about this first step, and the theme that will be running through these panels, and I'm hoping that you take away and think about through this afternoon, is what's the next step? How do we build on this momentum? How do we move from this first step to full-throated gallop into the future and learn from each other and disseminate this information? This compendium and what you're going to be hearing in the next panels is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just scratching the surface of all the brilliance and the creativity that we have in the state and local governments. What do we do next? And we look to you to help us solve that riddle. And I'm very excited because I think the implications of what we're doing here, focusing on the state and local provincial authorities, are profound. Throughout the compendium, and I'm sure throughout today, we'll learn of a variegated array of policies and programs that ultimately form a constellation of solutions to the multiple challenge of increasing the diffusion of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies, and ultimately to reducing the greenhouse gas emissions in all of our countries. Throughout the compendium and through the panel discussions, we will get a brilliant glimpse at the multiplicity of experiments that can adequately respond to the diversity and plurality of the conditions we face around the world. So again, on behalf of the State Department, REEL, the whole project, I want to thank all of you for coming here, spending time with us, and to celebrate the sentiment captured by John Stuart Mill when he said that it is the free and popular local and municipal institutions that provide the peculiar training of a citizen, the practical part of the political education of a free people. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to launch right into this panel. Just echo a few of Griff's sentiments. I mean, we're here to talk about local solutions and learn from them, and we have an excellent panel with us here today to do that. I think it goes without saying that what we're trying to achieve here requires systemic change. That energy and energy use requires a whole host of different players in a community, in a state, to come together and develop these solutions. And I think the members of our panel here today will speak to that. We have with us, to my immediate left, Keith Welks, who is Pennsylvania's Deputy State Treasurer for Fiscal Operations. Next to him, next to him, I'm glad I looked, Dorian Dale, who is the Energy Director and Sustainability Officer in Babylon, New York, and then George Young, who is the Director of Policy with the Vermont Public Service Board. I happen to have the benefit of knowing Dorian the best, and I'll just make one added comment, which is I made my own attempt this past year to put a high-efficiency boiler in my co-op in Brooklyn, New York. It only took me a year and 3 months to get my co-op board to approve me putting a hole in the roof about the size of Dorian's thermos so that the water vapor could be properly ducted and not ducted into a shared chimney. And so I have one of two aspirations: either to move to Babylon, New York, or learn from our panel today about how to make these sorts of systemic changes, which require co-op boards and contractors and financiers and policymakers to come together. So with that, why don't I turn it over first to Keith, and thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thought I was going last, but I'm happy to go first. No, it's fine. Okay. I wasn't going to be working on my remarks during the first two presenters.
Okay, good.
Remarkably enough, they're actually complete. Well, thank you very much on behalf of Pennsylvania Treasury for inviting us to participate. We're honored to be here, excited. It's a great opportunity. I was here for much of this morning's panel, and it was a great launch pad, a great kickoff. I want to start by engaging in the time-honored practice of lowering expectations. I'm always a little skeptical and a lot terrified when I'm introduced on a best practices panel. Number one, it sounds egotistical, but actually more troubling is I'm always certain there's some joker in the audience who says, after hearing my remarks, you know, that's not even a good practice. What I'm doing is far better. And so if I can, I'm going to modify the title. I'm going to talk about pretty good practices, let's hope. Let me start by doing a little positioning. I'm from the Pennsylvania Treasury Department. That means that we are in some ways, and in some very significant ways, quite distinct from most of the kinds of organizations and entities that talk about energy efficiency and providing support for energy efficiency. We are, in a sentence, not a program agency, okay? It's a very important thing to get on the table. That means that we don't have appropriated funds from our legislature, from the Pennsylvania General Assembly, that are given to us to carry out programmatic activities with particular objectives, whether those objectives are to support energy conservation or anything else. That's not what we do. We are an investor. We are essentially a quasi-private party investor entrusted with the responsibility of managing the Commonwealth's assets and generating return from those assets for as long as we have them and they aren't needed by other agencies to make payments. We have a statutory standard that's imposed upon us when we manage those monies. It's the prudent person standard. Most fiduciaries are familiar with it. And it essentially, in short, obligates us to generate a reasonable rate of return on any monies that we hold commensurate with the risk associated with the investment class into which we place those dollars. So everything I talk about today that we've done is in the spirit of being a prudent investor. And the bottom line for this discussion is that that means that we can't simply get involved in a project because we like the objectives of that project. We can't simply support an energy efficiency kind of initiative because we think the end result, reduced consumption of fossil fuels, is a good result. It may very well be a good result, but that's not a good result that has any bearing on our decision making. So that's an important first thing to talk about. I'm going to try and run through fairly quickly a program we're involved in, that we're invested in, to remain faithful to my theme, that we're invested in Pennsylvania, called the HELP program, Home Energy Loan Program. It's a program that we created, or was created, about 5 years ago. Bob Casey was elected treasurer. I joined the office in 2005. Bob Casey told his staff, look, we have a prudent person responsibility, so I want you guys to go out and find investments that are going to do well for the Commonwealth, but I also want you to find investments that at the same time are going to do good for the people of the Commonwealth in ways that you could. Based on my particular background, I was interested in environmentally themed investment opportunities, and I, after talking to lots of people, became convinced that there had to be some way that we as Treasury could invest in energy efficiency plays that were sufficiently well designed that they would generate a return that would both repay our investment, create a yield to us, and still be worthwhile to the person who actually took them up. In short, if you will, to borrow a term from Hollywood, where if you can describe a movie in 25 words or less, which is called high concept, you can get your movie made. If it takes you 26 words to describe what your movie's about, you can't get funding for it. So our high concept was, we wanted the amount of money that a homeowner saved from implementing an energy efficiency project each month to be roughly the same as the cost of paying off the loan for that energy efficiency project. If they could break even on a loan and then have all return after the loan was paid off, that sounded like a good place for us to be investing. And so that's what we tried to do. Spent a lot of time looking for someone who might have some thoughts on how we could do that. What we knew was that we needed a partner, both because we didn't know anything about this space, and because, so I already have more than two, both is not the right lead-in, and because we don't do retail investing, and also because we have to have a partner. We're an investor, we're not a program agency. And here's where we got particularly lucky. We found a firm, a consumer lender in Allentown, Pennsylvania, that had been doing energy lending for 12 or 15 years. And they understood what the secret of success in this field was. People who have paid attention to this area probably know that there have been many, if conceivably dozens, of what I would characterize as bank-based loan programs, loan support programs for energy efficiency projects that have been created over the past several decades. Very few of them have succeeded. Very few of them have gotten any traction. And that's because, we believe, that's because most energy efficiency loans, and I'll drop a footnote here that we're going to start talking, if I have time, to discuss other kinds, but most energy efficiency loans, even today, are what we consider to be, or what we would call reactive. That is to say that most of these loans for home improvements are taken out by someone whose furnace is broken down on February 3rd and is looking at 0-degree days for the next week or two and wants to get a new furnace in place as rapidly as possible. Okay? It's not someone who's going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's the most efficient way to do that. If it's someone who goes to a bank, they're not going to be thinking about energy efficiency at all. They're going to be getting the loan and then hiring a contractor to put the improvement in. So if you want to do energy efficiency, you have to sell that product. And that sale occurs with the contractor. So one of the first keys that we understood and was actually taught to us was that having contractors who were committed to an energy efficiency program, both because they knew it, believed in it, and also because they had an incentive associated with selling that program, were a key ingredient to success. The investment partner we worked with happened to be working that way. A firm called AFC First Financial. They had, when we first engaged with them, about 500 contractors that they had created into a network. They had trained them in these techniques. They had sort of validated them as competent, professional, and ethical, and they were working through them. These contractors clearly were interested in simplicity. They were interested in a product they could sell rapidly. They were interested in something that a homeowner could understand easily, and they were interested in financing approvals that could be generated quickly enough that the homeowner would say, yep, let's go ahead and do that. So we entered into a relationship with AFC First. We agreed to, after designing the elements of the program with them, agreed to make $20 million available in capital that we would use to acquire loans that AFC First originated that were energy efficiency themed. The program elements that we agreed upon were essentially the following. Only Energy Star rated or better installations would be approved. And by the way, I am aware that Energy Star has gotten a bit of a black eye over the last couple of weeks, but it's still the only certification program that anyone recognizes, and I think on balance is probably better than just nothing. So, but 4 years ago it was much better than just nothing. Now it may just be slightly better than just nothing. But anyway, it was used to be much better than just nothing. So Energy Star improvements or better, okay? 10-year unsecured loans. By the way, that is a term, a length of time that is essentially unprecedented in this market space, but goes towards keeping the monthly loan payment low enough so that we meet the high concept I described earlier. $10,000 maximum. And then we were able to offer a rate that covered AFC's spread to do the servicing, to run its network, to develop training materials and those kinds of things, and a yield that Treasury deemed appropriate based on the factor we were using as our comparable at that time, which was Fed funds rate, if I'm not mistaken. So in the first year of the program, the loans were at 7.99. Now, a lot of people may say, gee, 7.99 isn't that cheap. I can do less with my home equity line, et cetera. We basically said, you know what? We think energy efficiency is a great idea. If you can do it for less, please go somewhere else and take that money. If you can do it with money you have in a bank and do it in cash, great, do it. If you want to take out a home equity line, fine, do it. But there are thousands and thousands of people every year who are putting this on credit cards at 18%. We're doing it through big box financing it at more than 18 or 20%, or we're not able to do it at all. And for these people, and by the way, AFC was doing lots and lots of these loans at 12 and 14%, which is the basic market rate that we were looking at that point. So this was a significantly below market rate, and yet still one that allowed Treasury to be a prudent investor. Okay? We flexed the rates a little bit in the following year because the national interest rate market changed, and we went to 8.99. But they're fixed rates, so once you took out a loan, that was the rate that you got for the period of the loan. And the program was very well received. We had lots of transaction volume, essentially all that Treasury was prepared to support at that time. Ran the program for about 2.5, 3 years, and in 2008, the State Environmental Agency, which kind of doubles in Pennsylvania as the Energy Office, came to us and said, we just got some funding from the legislature to support consumer energy conservation. We know about your program, and we'd like to see if we could partner up. So we worked with DEP, changed the terms so that we were now actually what we call buying down the rates below market. So we were using DEP dollars to offer the loans to homeowners at 6.99, 5.99, and 4.99. I'll explain what that is in a minute. And then would buy up Treasury's yield and the amount that AFC needed to cover its spread by using DEP program support dollars. So we essentially combined a sustainable model, if you will, with a publicly supported model. This allowed us, as I said, to offer even lower rates, and we could build in this graduated or tiered structure that created incentives. So now The sort of baseline rate, if you will, the 699, was for people who did the traditional Energy Star loans. 599 were for people who did improvements that actually creamed the top 10%, more or less, of the Energy Star lists. So now you're not just Energy Star, you've got to be the best of the Energy Star. You're doing more, you're probably paying a little more for your installation, we're going to offer you a better rate. The exciting thing we did was build in whole house principles now. To get to a 499 rate, you had to agree to do a whole house audit by a certified auditor and implement a minimum number of recommendations off the auditor's list. And you could get a 499 loan. We pushed the maximum at that point up to $15,000. And so in that fashion, we think we created this blend of incentives and some market steering by encouraging whole house practices without resorting to a traditional command and control. We didn't say we'll only fund whole house audit loans. But we made it clear that those are the ones that we thought were best and the ones we provide the greatest level of support to. So program has now been in place for about 4.5, 5 years. It has been, by, we think, our standards, a very, very significant success. We've done more than 5,500 loans, starting from zero. We have $35 million that we've put out in loan product. And currently Treasury is holding about $22 million of that. The rest is sort of paid off. Either it's been reduced or some people paid early. And even though this program started before the economic meltdown, and we're now, one hopes, coming out of the economic meltdown, we're looking at a loan loss experience of under 1.5% aggregate. So we're very pleased with that, and it is a straight unsecured program. So that performance is, we think, quite remarkable. We actually think that there are some, and this is entirely anecdotal, if not arguably preposterous, but we think there's some reason to believe that there's a psychological connection that folks make when they realize they put something in that is actually benefiting them, that they're really very pleased about the product they've gotten. None of these loans are actually funded to the contractors until the homeowner signs off and says, yes, this was done to my specifications, this is what I ordered, this is what I want. So we have a high level of buy-in at the outset for a product that people think is actually working for them, and we believe it is working. The anecdotal information we have is that people are saving money on their energy costs, and so the acceptance is quite significant. And so we are hoping that that's one of the drivers that's reflected in the pay-down performance to date. Now, let me try and I know we have brief time, so let me wrap up by talking about some concepts of broader sustainability, sort of economic or financial sustainability. This all sounds great, and frankly, it is great. We're very, very pleased about the program. Even if the state energy money went away and we had to return to our original rate structure, in theory, that's a sustainable program. There are a couple of generalizations I'm making here in the interest of brevity, but in general, that's a sustainable program. But there's a problem. Being a prudent investor, as we have to be, doesn't only mean that we generate a return on what we invest in. It also means that we have to observe principles about portfolio diversification and concentration. That's a fancy way of saying we can't hold too much of any one kind of asset class. At the end of the day, these loans, wonderful as they have been for us, are still unsecured consumer loans, or as they're better known over the last 3 years, toxic. Okay? And so, needless to say, our financial people are not ecstatic about having a lot of these. And so there's a limit to how much we would hold, how much paper we would hold of this kind of asset class. And I'm not sure the financial people at Treasury have seen this, but we actually passed that limit about 3 months ago. And so we can't really continue to do what we're doing now. We can't buy many more of these loans after AFC first originates them. Our choices are either to abandon the program, wait till loans term out, and we've got more money back that way, but that's a long, slow process, or what's the obvious solution? We sell these, exactly. We look for a secondary market investor. Guess what? These are a unique asset class. They don't exist other than here, okay? There are no secondary market investors for these kinds of loans, all right? And if there were, the first thing they'd say is, boy, these are unsecured consumer loans. Thanks a lot. And so Treasury has now engaged upon a daring emprise, as we say, to sell our portfolio. We've retained an investment advisor. We have some very high-level support from foundations who are interested in our sort of testing the marketplace. We're working with a consortium of other states that want to see us develop a model and a precedent, and we hope within the next 3 to 6 months to have sold our portfolio and started to establish a market value for these kinds of loans. Now, that's great, but that's still just Treasury, that's just one sale. People who've been paying attention to the sort of national political climate on this issue may be aware that the Obama administration has essentially identified home house retrofits as an enormous, not only opportunity, but almost essential undertaking for the country. And they're talking about millions of homes over the next 10 years being retrofitted at the cost of billions and billions of dollars. That would, in theory, require a sustainable secondary market. Not just Pennsylvania Treasury selling $25 million every 3 or 4 years. That's not a sustainable secondary market. There are other states, and in fact utilities in other parts of the country, who are doing this to a greater or lesser extent. It turns out, and we didn't even realize this at the time, but it turns out that Treasury in Pennsylvania is doing something that very few, if anyone else, is doing. We are holding our loans. We are actually serving as our own warehouse facility. We can do that because they're an asset class. We're happy about their performance. Virtually everyone else is doing this cannot hold their loans. So they're doing flow-through sales. They're originating loans and they're selling them immediately. And because they have to get rid of them immediately, there's only one buyer that they can turn to, Fannie Mae. And Fannie Mae currently buys these loans at 13.99 and 14.99. That's the yield that it demands, okay, which is exorbitant and not sustainable, because no homeowner is going to take these loans out at that. You're not going to drive homeowners to get into this area at an interest rate like that. So states are having to buy down or buy up, depending on your perspective, to get Fannie Mae to do this, which means they're expending phenomenal sums of money. Programs remain small. So there are other states who would like to do this. The first step in those other states being able to do it is to have a warehouse facility, an aggregator that could hold loans until they reach a size that would attract secondary market investors and then sell them. Okay? Well, Treasury's interested in being such an aggregator. And in a sort of robust, mature market, you need more than one. We're talking about a lot of money moving through, but we need at least one to start with. So Treasury is also now working with advisors and the Department of Energy to explore how to model this market to determine whether we can be a warehouse facility for these loans, which would allow other states to be doing it more robustly and far more cheaply. So let me sort of stop there with that as the future for us. We want to keep doing this locally. We want to sell our portfolio, and we want to be able to create at least the first of what we hope will be a series of warehouse facilities that would enable more states to do this in a way more or less similar. It does not be identical, but more or less similar to the way we are, which fits in with a lot of goals that we all have. So thank you. I hope I didn't run too long.
Thank you, Keith. Why don't we go to the town of Babylon, and then we'll go back up to the state level afterwards. Dorian.
Bruce, we will send some of our governance people to your co-op board to show them how to expedite matters. I think we're pretty good at that. Well, okay. We in the town of Babylon, first and foremost, and I think this is a critical consideration, have a real action bias, and we have a real action bias because we got a young Turk who's the supervisor of the town, who's been a long-time environmentalist, and who fundamentally looks at problems and wants to solve them immediately, if not sooner. So it's usually damn the torpedoes as far as we go. And a good example of that is we passed building codes in 2006 requiring Energy Star standards for home construction and LEED standards for all new commercial and industrial construction over 4,000 square feet. We had a large developer named Ed Blumenfeld who was putting up a Tanger Mall in our township. And at the press conference, he goes up to Ed and he says, pulls him aside. This is a press conference for the groundbreaking for this big mall. And he says, usually it was Ed. Ed, I want to talk to you about green. And later, Ed says at a U.S. Green Building Council gala that he never in his life had been shaken down so brazenly in such a public way until the supervisor says, no, I want you to do this project green. And he was so relieved, he said, sure. And of course, he didn't know what he was getting into. But he just received a silver certification for his project. And the short-term environmental benefit was that they opened up a rail spur to bring in all construction material and take out construction waste, eliminating all that diesel fuel traffic coming in and out of the town. And I can assure you that really reduced the ruffle feathers. We still had certainly a good number of them. And oh, by the way, there was an examination of 8 major projects that started out on Long Island since the year 2000. Including a lighthouse project in Nassau with a large developer called Reckler, which is now shelved. And the last project to start, which was at Tanger Mall in 2005, was the first and only project to finish. So I say that, yes, by way of illustrating that for one reason or another, and I think there are probably lots of contributory factors, I think we have been admirably positioned to really get things done. So the next step we went to after we found out that nobody was building anything new and we couldn't save any, we can reduce our carbon footprint that way, was to figure out how to make our town facilities more efficient. And as that was being done by an ESCO, our supervisor said, now let me hear this again. You're going to change out all our energy infrastructure and the capital, the savings that we realize as a result of this changeover is going to cover the capital costs, and you guarantee it? And the ESCO said, yep. And he says, can you do that for residential? And the ESCO looked at him like he had three eyes. And they said, look, when we're doing one of these large-scale jobs, all we have to do is deal with one slightly eccentric energy director. But when we're doing this on a larger scale basis, we're going to have 300 homeowners, some of whom are IEDs, so waiting to blow up on us, and I can assure you that is the case. There's a disaggregated cost. It's simply not an economic model for us. But the one thing we knew in looking at this particular business was that this ESCO was bringing in subcons to do the actual work, and they were taking a 30% management fee on top of it. So clearly there was a lot of fat to be drawn upon in this process. And everybody's, I think, underscored that since this time. I think you're all quite familiar with the stats. In our town, 38% of our residential, 30% of our carbon footprint is due to residential housing, and 24% to commercial. So we have huge opportunities, and if, like everybody else, we have these very aspirational goals to reduce our carbon footprint, clearly the largest scale opportunity is in the building sector. So the first thing that we set about doing was to figure out how we might finance a pilot project. In our town, we attracted an energy from waste facility a couple of decades ago called Covanta. You might have read an article about energy from waste facilities in the New York Times last week. It's in Denmark, I think they have 29 of them for 5.5 million people, and in the United States we have 87 of them for 300 million people. But we're fortunate in Babylon to be one of those facilities, and what it's meant in practical terms is we've been generating 16 megawatts of power and getting revenues from that. We've been charging tipping fees from surrounding municipalities. And on top of that, at about the same time, we wrenched control of the carting from the guys in Brooklyn. So, yeah, of which I talk. So they no longer get the VIG, we get it. In effect, we've turned a collection of solid waste into a revenue stream for the municipality, and as a result, we have a large solid waste reserve. And that's where this pile of money was sitting. It was capturing very nominal money market rates. So all we had to do was figure out how to rationalize our funding energy waste from a solid waste facility. So we expanded our definition, or our standard definition of solid waste. You can go look it up. I won't have to repeat it for you, but we added energy waste by dint of its carbon component. Carbon dioxide being 28% carbon, ergo solid in its origins, ergo good enough for us to tap into this fund, and we were off to the races as far as that aspect of it was concerned. Then we had to figure out how we would actually build this, and at the time there was a lot of buzz about something called pay as you save, and there were a number of pilot programs that had been run with utilities. NYSERDA, who is the operational energy unit in our state, had done a white paper, and everybody had been a party to how wonderful a principle this was, including our power authority on Long Island. But when we asked them if they might do on-bill financing for us, they politely declined to do so. And as a result, we then went back to our own system. And as we were billing waste collection as a benefit assessment, as we do any service that we provide private entities, we determined that that would be the way we would bill. and we had a robust software system that did our billing for us. As a result, almost unwittingly, we stumbled across what now has popularly become to be referred to as PACE programs, or Property Assessed Clean Energy Programs. Except ours is really a base program. It's a benefit assessed clean energy program, and I would suggest that the strength of that is that it doesn't have that four-letter word in it, tax. It has the same effect if the homeowner is not fulfilling their obligation in a timely fashion and are delinquent. It does revolve to the property tax. To date, we've had over 400 participants, and that hasn't been the case. We're not in operation as long as Pennsylvania, but it also means that we are using a mechanism that's been well established and validated. It was affirmed by the Revenue Bond Act of 1933 and is a common municipal vehicle used across the country in various ways, shapes, and forms. I know in Pennsylvania, where there are Commonwealth, there are more constraints on localities doing these kinds of initiatives. But we're a home rule state to a large degree, although Rit Agrawala, the sustainability officer from New York City, might take issue with how much latitude the state actually affords them. Again, the advantage of being kind of a backwater, as we are in Babylon, is that we've done things, again with this action bias, that many people might have subjected to question. So when a neighboring town went to emulate our program, and they're about twice our size, a town named Brookhaven, their in-house attorney said, well, this is a violation of Article 8, Section 1 of the New York State Constitution, which posits that a public entity may not provide a loan or a gift to a private entity unless it's for a public purpose, and these are loans, and we don't see any public purpose in this. Well, we took issue with that, and in part, we were able to do that because, again, getting back to the operational aspects of why I think we've been able to proceed expeditiously, we take our town attorneys and put them in a cage in the corner of Town Hall and only let them out when they'll give us validating opinions on what we want to do. She must be married to an attorney. I think that, again, you also have to look at what you're doing in a program and think of the worst case scenario. Having been something of a student of that great Satan, Robert Moses, we know that once you get something halfway done and it's looking pretty good and it's already halfway there, it's going to take a heck of a team of horses to hold it back from getting completed. And that's really what we looked at when we went operation with our program and people were questioning it. We said, okay, what's going on here? Somebody sues us. What are they suing? Well, they're suing a program that seals up people's houses, remediates the airs, saves homeowners money, puts people to work. Oh, and by the way, it's a revolving fund. We get our money back. That's pretty good policy, and if you want to sue us, great. That's a great press release. We'll get more exposure for it, and frankly, at the end of the day, that's the donut hole in all these programs that I think we're still tiptoeing around, and that's how we're actually going to drive demand after all the smart money people collect and identify how these loans get packaged, resold, et cetera, and so forth. There's an awful lot of interest, but that interest, as we've seen over the past 30 years, has yet to even begin to reach critical mass among the actual people who will use these services, and that's the homeowner. And that's why we believe also what we've done in this Babylon program is particularly important. We like to say that there are three things that we're providing the homeowner. That's cost, comfort, and convenience. We are giving them a one-stop retrofit. We're providing their financing. At this point, it's only 3%. We're going to have to ratchet that up a little bit if we want to, package these loans and resell them. So that's a nice attraction. Obviously, as a benefit assessed loan, if they leave before the term of the obligation, the balance of the obligation gets assigned to the property, ergo the next property owner picks it up. They're not on the hook for X number of years. We also qualify all our contractors. They're all building performance contractors. Rather than you as a single homeowner dealing with a home improvement contractor when he comes up short on what you think he should be doing, you have the good auspices of the entire town to bring down upon the shoulders of said, underperforming contractor. Because obviously, if he's only dealing with you, he can go through small claims court and make you wait forever. But if he's got dozens of jobs that he's dependent on from the town, he responds very quickly. And I can assure you that's exactly what's happened in circumstances where people have in fact had issues. And the other beauty is we're also running a program, and this is I don't know when was the last time you received services or products from somebody and you didn't like them, and then in November you actually got to step into a booth to vote to fire the CEO of that operation. That's in effect what you get to do when you have these municipally administered operations. So people ask us about the cost of actually administering this, and we've just absorbed that into the cost of doing town business. We pick up your garbage, we shovel your streets, we fill your potholes, and now we're sealing up the cracks and crevices in your house as a part of doing town business. It means that we also have decided program discipline. Our average jobs are running close to a 2.0 SIR, savings to investment ratio. So in effect, and we've already established that the savings do cover the cost of the loans. We also were very vigorous in bringing in all the stakeholders. We brought in the unions, we brought in the contractors, we brought in the local bankers and real estate folks who might customarily have objected, and we got sign-off. So we haven't had really anybody taking issue. The only challenges we've had are those neighboring towns who've been interested in the aspirational aspects of doing these programs, but somehow can't get out of their way when they actually get down to trying to figure out how they are going to go operational. So this has been one of our challenges because there are neighboring towns who have been launching their programs and have been asking us for advice, but at the end of the day, we really are fortunate in the town that stars have aligned, and we have a very entrepreneurial spirit and a few capable guys who are willing to actually, hit the ground running and get things done. A lot of other things I could tell you, but I think I'm going to pass it along.
Dorian, thank you very much. And George.
Oh, and by the way, on the issue of best practices, we collect suboptimal practices, although it's really kind of a touchy issue because while I'm one of the few people who seems to get away with telling people what's what, most people really don't like to hear it, and when you're working for a politician, he gets really nervous when you do tell people these things. So.
Thanks. Well, we're going to switch from energy efficiency investments to renewables here with, I guess the topic is feed-in tariffs, and I'm actually going to focus on what we have, which is a little different. It's called a standard offer program. Basically, as an overview, Vermont's been trying for, and the Vermont legislature in particular, been trying for a number of years to encourage renewable energy development. When a number of other New England states started pursuing renewable portfolio standards, Vermont looked at it and said, gee, that's a nice idea, but we're not sure we want to go that far because it might raise costs for people. So eventually in 2005, we put in a system where there is a renewable portfolio standard that doesn't take effect till 2013, but the legislature decided to create a carrot and stick. The stick is the RPS. The carrot piece was what was called the SPEED program. And I always had to remember what this acronym means. Sustainably Priced Energy Enterprise Development Program. Basically, it's they set up a program which says if you can meet all load growth in Vermont with energy efficiency or renewables, and have at least 5% renewables by 2012 over the 2004 baseline, no RPS kicks in. And so the incentive was out there for the utilities to start developing renewables, and everybody, including the renewable community, said, gee, this will be enough. Now they'll actually start doing something. In 2008, there was some development, but a couple of other things happened that basically sort of changed everybody's mindset. Number one, energy efficiency really was kicking in, so we were expecting, we're having no load growth, and actually last year, I think loads down 3%. Of course, recession helped a lot on that, but even before that, the energy efficiency programs that are run in Vermont now pretty much eliminate almost all load growth in the state. And beyond that, some of the renewables that had been developed early on, in particular by a couple of utilities, were going to cover the entire 5%. So all the incentives in this program didn't seem to be working to have this wonderful spur of renewable development and get a lot more proposals out there. We do have in front of us, we have approved at the Public Service Board 2 wind facilities, but they've gotten hung up on financing issues and haven't been built yet. So in 2008, the legislature decided to go a little farther and say, okay, instead of having this incentive, we want the Public Service Board to develop a rate for renewable projects that will encourage them, but still be consistent with least cost principles. Given that most renewable development is more costly than other alternatives on the market, that was a little bit of a challenge. We looked at that for a little bit, and given that they passed the bill in the middle of the year, by January they were already impatient that we didn't have tons of development. So they took the whole thing out of the Public Service Board's hands and set up the standard offer program. And let me just state that the standard, we think it's an important distinction between a standard offer and a feed-in tariff. It's not a tariff per se. One thing to keep in mind, I'm going to put my lawyer hat on, is that the tariffs for wholesale services, and these are wholesale products, are regulated at the federal level. So if the state wanted to actually do the tariff, we couldn't, because it becomes a state tariff. It would be an attempt at a state tariff, but it wouldn't be our jurisdiction, so we couldn't do it. And then the utilities would actually be the ones going to FERC, and if they didn't actually want to do it, our leverage to make them do anything was fairly limited. The standard offer program, by contrast, makes use of the state essentially buying the power and distributing it to all the other utilities. We have an entity called the Speed Facilitator, who was put in place when the whole program was first gotten up and running in 2005. His goal originally was to try to go out and make deals and encourage deals between renewable developers and utilities, and that didn't really produce much. But his role was expanded by the legislature to now offering these standard offer contracts. The legislature thought that also got around the jurisdictional problems. There's an open question there. There's certainly some questions as to whether we in fact are engaging in wholesale operations, but nobody's raised that so far. And as part of the standard offer program, what the legislature directed us to do was to have a 50 megawatt program for small renewable development, maximum size 2.2 megawatts. Have the program, these offers available until that 50 megawatts was filled. And we are supposed to set rates based upon cost. The rates that would be offered by the Speed Facilitator were based upon cost, not least cost principles. And so if the cost of a solar project was, at least, I'll get to the prices in a minute, was 30 cents, we're supposed to set a rate of 30 cents per kilowatt hour for that solar project, even though the market price at the time the bill passed was somewhere around 7 cents, and now is, I believe in New England, around 4.5 cents is the market clearing price. So you can see a major gap here in terms of what we're paying under this program and what the alternatives are in the market. The other part of this is the Speed Facilitator, who is under contract to us, the Public Service Board. And for those of you who, we have a different name. Most other states call it the Public Utilities Commission. Same thing. There are some different splits in Vermont that make it different, but we're the equivalent of the Public Utilities Commission in most other states. The speed facilitator works for us, and he buys the power and then distributes it to all the other utilities. So it gets shared among all the other utilities. So that gets around the issue of, well, this utility doesn't want to buy these solar projects because it's going to raise its rates. Everybody, it's essentially a public benefit, a public sharing type program. So in terms of pricing, in order to encourage this, what the statute requires is that we set the prices that the program will pay based upon the costs. So we look at costs, both direct install costs, operation and maintenance costs, financing costs. You have to make assumptions on what's it going to cost to finance. And we actually had a litigated case where we heard evidence on, on all these things, which was fairly entertaining. You include a reasonable return on the investment built into that. And then you make adjustments for known revenue streams that they're going to have, such as grants. And in the end, you make a final adjustment, which is enough to encourage rapid development, but not too much, which some people came to start calling the Goldilocks standard. It's not clear exactly what that meant. It basically gave us discretion to adjust the rates up and down. And this took effect last June of 2009. What the legislature also did was told us we had to have the program up and running by September, or by the end of September. So they gave us a grand total of 3 months to get this whole new program up and running. We missed the date by a little bit. We got the first bids in and first proposals in October is when we opened the program up. They set in the statute default prices. The default prices, 30 cents per kilowatt hour for solar, 20 cents for small wind, and wind 15 kilowatts or less, 12 cents for landfill methane, and 12.5 cents for other renewable sources. And said those prices are going to be the initial prices unless you board by mid-September, in 3 months, to find that they're completely wrong. And in 3 months, we had time to look enough to say, no, they're at least in the ballpark, except we raised the farm methane price from 12.5 to 16 cents. Following that, we were required to have a detailed evaluation of the prices and actually set them bottom up by January 15th. We met that deadline. The result of that was the solar dropped from 30 to 24. All the prices came down a little bit. Farm methane from 16 to 14.1. Landfill methane down to 9, and the rest are somewhere right around 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Again, the market's still 4.5 cents. The program was opened, the results of the program, it was opened up in October 19th is when we opened it for bids. On the first day the program was open, we had bids for 47 megawatts of power. Actually, we had bids for 160 megawatts, but we had set up subcaps so that no one technology could be more than 12.5 megawatts because we had some suspicions that solar was going to flood the system. And in fact, we got 185 bids for solar for somewhere around 169 megawatts. I think most of us looked at those numbers and said, gee, I think we got the solar price a little too high with that kind of demand. But the whole program, 47 megawatts within the subcaps filled on the first day. Within 2 weeks, we had filled the whole 50 megawatts of the program. The average size, it was nearly 1 megawatt each. So these are some, with a 2.5 or 2.2 megawatt cap, these are more sizable facilities. They're not your homeowner size or farm size developments for the most part. These are much larger, except obviously the farm methane programs, which are farm sized. The projects are now working their way through the approval process, and some are actually up and running. Some of those are going to drop out. We know they're going to drop out. They're not going to get financing, and then we'll have to deal with who moves into the program. But so far, I think the effect of the higher prices has achieved what the legislature wanted. The flip side is, the estimate to that we heard during our proceeding is that it's going to be a net incremental cost to Vermont ratepayers of $52 million over the next 20 years. Small numbers by, for those of you in states that are bigger than Vermont, which is pretty much everybody, those are really small dollars, but in Vermont that's not an insubstantial amount. That's a pretty good above market premium that you're paying. And that's the ultimate ultimate trade-off is when these start flowing through into electrical rates. What are people going to say? It's one of the big conundrums I think everybody with renewable energy faces is you ask people, do they want it? Yep. How much more are they willing to pay? It gets a little fuzzier, and we'll see what the effect is. It'll be several years before the effect starts flowing through into rates. So, and it'll get filtered in slowly, but then we'll see what happens. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. One thing I was remiss in mentioning, and I'm going to read this before we go into Q&A, the event sessions and their Q&A will be video recorded by Yale with the intent of posting to YouTube for public viewing, and by participating in the Q&A, audience members acknowledge that their questions will be included. So thank you, panelists. I thought that was excellent. I think we're fortunate to hear about experiences that are perhaps more than just first-generation communities and states that have been at this for some time, and I think are perhaps suggesting some areas of interest and questions around whether there's sufficient demand to bring these to scale, questions of what it might take to get a secondary market built around these products. And why don't we turn it over to all of you for questions and discussion. Anyone?
Boy, we've answered every question. We preempted them.
Here we are, just over on the side here. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Kristen Trotz, and I am a second year at the Yale School of Forestry. And I'm curious, it sounds in each of your experiences that you had an active role played by the legislature or the equivalent body in your situation. And I'm curious if you believe that there are drivers for programs like these in places where there's not state support. Are there other drivers that can lead to the establishment of these types of programs that are not wholly backed by the state?
Well, you're the state guys. I can tell you that that's my bias is to be as independent as possible. We developed our program in the Sahara, the Bush years, and I think the self-reliance that we've had to instill in our program has made it a stronger program. We are continuing, as we've done from the outset, to look for market-based solutions and get away from as much government input as possible. We will leave others to go through the process. We're sort of, again, as I've innovated, less process-oriented and there are plenty of people who are willing to carry the water on that. We just prefer to get the job done. We'll continue to look for partners and for mechanisms that will enhance that principle. From my perspective, and I think I can speak from our state's perspective, the legislature's role in this one was key, but that was not so much an absence of willingness to go forward as we're a creature of state law, and we have to comply with state law in everything we do. And some of the principles that have been embedded in state law for years are principles such as least cost provision of energy service. And we fault utilities when they enter into contracts that aren't least cost. And for something like a renewable standard, and when you're going to pay somebody 30 cents or 24 cents per kilowatt hour for solar when you can buy it for 4.5 cents,
If the utility had done that before this statute, we probably would have said, gee, that's not warranted. Now, that having been said, for years we've pushed the envelope to take into account non-monetary cost considerations, as we call them, externalities. And we've had externality adjustments for 20 years in Vermont, taking into account unpriced externalities such as air emissions. I'm not sure we've fully captured actually I'm probably reasonably certain that in some of those we haven't fully captured the value of carbon and climate change. I mean, that's a very tough. But certainly we take that into account. So for example, we've approved one utility paying an extra 6 cents for solar before this because it was likely to be on peak. And because it was on peak, it actually had a different cost characteristic than a normal market purchase, and it was more likely to be cost effective. So we've pushed the envelope, but we're stuck with complying with state law, which has the least cost principles, which as ratepayers, by the way, most of us want. We don't want to pay for gold-plated facilities. So therefore, the legislature's role was absolutely key in telling us to either abandon those principles or exactly what to do, because otherwise we'd not be complying with our duties.
Hi, I'm Gabe Dubois with the Yale School of Management. You touched very slightly on sort of the idea of base bonds, or base bonds as you call them. And actually, Jack Hidari, who I believe was involved in coming up with the original idea behind base bonds, presented the idea at the School of Management just a month ago.
I'm sorry, the name was?
Jack Hidari.
Oh, Jack Hidari. Yes,
Hidari,
okay,
yeah.
sure.
So it seemed, I think, to everyone there was a really elegant idea, and it sort of dealt with a lot of the principal agent issues that you see in investments of this sort. I'm wondering, from your perspective, or frankly anyone's perspective here, what some of the challenges are to it being adopted on a much wider scale.
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
Sure. I mean, I'll very briefly say we have obviously not had to deal with that. We developed a model that is working with no security. We understand the appeal of that. The challenge that we see in that is you need to get many, many municipalities to each implement such a program, and you have to work through whether municipalities have the resources to be generating revenue streams, in other words, getting into capital markets. That's something that most smaller municipalities are going to be challenged to do, I think. You also have to then get them to put together the infrastructure to start including the additional billing component and the collection associated with that. And then I suppose the other issue is whether municipalities, when push comes to shove, and I don't want to sound like I'm opposed to playing devil's advocate, but the municipalities are going to start foreclosing on properties because someone's not paying $35 a month towards their energy costs. In which case, at which point, is it any more secure than an unsecured loan, and haven't you put an awful lot of process around something that doesn't provide any additional security for the investment?
Go ahead.
So I think we also view it as a pretty promising mechanism. I think there are a few areas of concern for us that we and our peers see. I think one of them is that these are voluntary programs. So the proposition has to be clear enough and compelling enough for a property owner to take that leap. And it's not clear to us yet that that this has been socialized sufficiently that there's enough demand to get to scale. But there's a lot of effort, I think, underway by many groups to make that happen. I think there's a lot of discussion about the tension between the lien and the mortgage holder in terms of what happens in a stress case, what happens in a foreclosure, and the implications for mortgage holders in terms of where they fall in line in terms of the flow of payments. And I think related to that, which is interesting, is that I think the information, there's an information disparity in terms of the information about the lien and how the financial community sees it, and it's available to them, and information around cost savings. And I think today, if you're a mortgage broker looking at the refinancing of a property, and that property has a PACE lien on it, you only see the lien. You don't see the cost savings that's associated with it. And frankly, you might not even be aware of what the mechanism is. So I think, in general, I think there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, socializing around the concept that needs to take place. But I think there are many reasons, compelling reasons to make that happen, and lots of groups that I think are active in trying to overcome these hurdles.
Can you just jump on that last point for 1 second? The interesting thing is that that's the exact same obstacle that the people who have been pushing for energy efficient mortgages have been unable to overcome for probably a decade and a half now. Mm-hmm. The fact that they want the reduction in household operating expenses associated with a much tighter house to be reflected in the borrower's FICO score, and banks and lenders have not yet agreed to do that. So all they see is that the house costs $20,000 more to make it real tight. They don't see that it returns $2,000 less in annual costs associated with the savings from that. So this is, in particular, that's an existing problem that no one's solved yet. I'm sorry, didn't mean to.
No, not at all. I think that's a great point. Look, there's 17 states that have passed various kinds of PACE legislation to date, as you're probably aware, because it seems like you've been following this. And I know in New York there was quote-unquote PACE legislation passed in November that had been pushed by our congressman, but it was really contingent on a lot of other enabling bits of legislation, particularly at the federal level, so you don't have those kind of price supports, for example, that are elemental to them. We actually had legislation, in all fairness, to this young lady's question before, our local assemblyman and state senator had gotten legislation to actually affirm the principle that we have using a waste district to do waste reduction. So in effect, in New York State, if you either have a waste district, which many municipalities do, you can do this, or if you want to, you can create a waste district to do this kind of work. And in effect, that gives you the validation to then go out and do various kinds of financing. As far as bonding is concerned, again, it gets back to, what kind of rates are you getting? Is this the ideal vehicle at this particular point in time for this particular application? What we're looking at now that we're going to larger numbers, and the financial guys, by the way, who were the first ones to tell us when we created this unwittingly, and I must say in all due deference to Jack Hittery, who's a wonderful guy, success has 100 fathers, and I would suggest this PACE program has maybe 1,000 fathers circling around it right now. But we unwittingly, as I said, developed this same principle without knowing what the acronym was ultimately going to be. And we only found out how good it was when the big money guys like Bruce came talking to us, because we wanted to move to a market-based model, and they said, we're more than eager to get behind you on this, but you got to have at least 30 million aggregated. Can you guys figure out how to go through neighborhoods the same way you repave roads and get 100 houses at a time doing it on the same day? And we just looked at them cross-eyed. But the principle is, yes, we have to get to these aggregated levels before those kinds of principles kick in. But for us, at the point in time where we are, based upon the other programs that are developing around us, we're going to actually bond for $2 million, but we're going to use that as a loan loss reserve to then attract debt and equity capital. That's the principle we're going to be pursuing, and we're not going to be funding this entirely out of government bonds and so on and so forth. I just don't think that's a long-term sustainable solution. The partnership is the key, and figuring that one out.
Thank you. So Leslie, do we have time for one more question? She brought in her. Are you hooking us off?
Well, one more question.
One more question? Okay, thank you.
We're already 20 minutes behind.
A very quick question, please. Thank you.
Dave Parsons, Yale School of Forestry. I have a question for you, Mr. Wilkes, about the program that you were describing, and just sounds like there's a disconnect between the rate of return that's acceptable to the Commonwealth and what's acceptable in the market. The 8% or 9% that you're willing to take, and then the market is demanding 14 or 12 or 14 or whatever the percentage is. How do you see how do you see this program moving forward? How are you going to be able to sell these loans with that disconnect? Are you going to have to sell them at a discount, or
essentially what you're? Let's accept your statement of the facts. There's some things I could straighten out, but at the time, it's a fair read of what I said. and we don't need to clarify that. What you're really describing is a monopoly situation right now. Given that there's no one else able to aggregate, the only place these loans are able to go in a flow-through basis is Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae, therefore, has a monopoly control and is essentially demanding the yield that it's able to demand. So the goal of creating a secondary market, which I talked about at the very end of my remarks, is in fact to create alternatives to Fannie Mae at much lower rates. If we can demonstrate that these loans perform and address investors' concerns about security, perhaps by adding a PACE component or an on-bill payment component or any of the other things, and generate a yield of 7 or 8%, then investors may be willing to take them out at 7 or 8%, and then Fannie Mae has to either stop doing it or become more competitive. So you're absolutely right. That is exactly the problem that is represented by the absence of a secondary market, and that's what we're hoping to address. Is that responsive?
So join me in thanking our panelists both for being here today and for their leadership on these issues.